And I'm back to my emceeing duties. Did you miss me? Just kidding. Oop. All right. Let's go to our international session. Yeah? So let's welcome Rod Hirsch, U.S. Department of Commerce, who will moderate our next session. And if you don't mind introducing our speakers when you get up there, that would be great.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, now I got it. I know we're running behind here, so and it's tough to follow up that panel, to be honest. But let me first start off with introducing myself. My name is Rod Hirsch. I'm the director of the Oakland Export Assistance Center with the U.S. Department of Commerce, International Trade Administration. The agency I work for is the U.S. Commercial Service. We're part of the Foreign Service as well. So anytime you go to a U.S. embassy or consulate, you go to the commercial section of that U.S. embassy or consulate. That's my agency. I am the domestic component of that. Meaning we have boots on the ground both here stateside and overseas, helping U.S. companies export their products and services. And Fintech is one of those big emerging industry sectors that we're very keenly interested in supporting in a number of different ways. So I also am going to be joined here by my colleague from Washington, D.C., with the same organization, the International Trade Administration, and he is a specialist more so than I. I'm out in the field here working with all sorts of different industry sector companies, but my colleague, Dr. Scott Schmith, PhD, is with the Office of Financial Services, and then I'm joined here by some other colleagues from other government agencies and entities. We have Brandon Chu with the Singapore Economic Development Board, a mouthful, and then Michal Kaczmarski with Invest Hong Kong. And so why that? Well, these are traditional financial centers in Asia, and Fintech is now part of that portfolio in their respective markets. So I'm going to ask each of my friends here on the panel some questions, and hopefully take some questions afterwards. So I'll start here with Brandon, which, by the way, I'm very glad you made it, Brandon. What are 3 things the audience might not know about Fintech in Singapore?
Hi, thanks for having me, everyone. I know the name of my organization is a bit of a mouthful, but the way that I try to remember it is I'm part of Singapore, which is a nation as a service for tech companies looking to invest in Asia and the region and beyond. I don't want to just talk about Singapore today, though, because Singapore is a small country, 5.5 million people, not such a big market. But I want to talk a little bit about Southeast Asia. And what you might not know about FinTech in Southeast Asia is, one, there's a lot of opportunity. So one of the previous talks talked about the unbanked population in the UK at 10 million. There's 200 million unbanked people in Southeast Asia looking for e-payments, opportunities, looking to open a bank account. So there's a real need for interesting fintech solutions, and I don't think it's going to come from just the legacy companies. The second thing you might not know is that it's already a vibrant space in Southeast Asia, fintech. Besides some of the usual players in banking, payments like Visa, MasterCard, you've also have emerging tech companies from the US. Stripe just opened an engineering team in Singapore last year, looking to build payment solutions for Southeast Asia, for example. PayPal has been in Singapore for quite a while, again, trying to access the Southeast Asian market and solve problems there. So you'll be in good company if you decide to think about a presence in Southeast Asia and hopefully Singapore. The third thing you might not know is that even though the opportunity is huge. Now is a good time to go in. At the moment, you don't see a clear winner in any of the fintech spaces, whether it's e-payments, financial services, KYC, both corporate and individual. You are seeing a couple of interesting players, both regional unicorns as well as global players like Google, Stripe, etc. But there's no clear winner yet. So if you were a fintech company here with a novel solution looking to go into the market, either by yourself or in partnership with one of the other companies I mentioned, I think now's the best time.
Wow, okay, thank you. Well, I'll switch over to my colleague here, Scott, who's come all the way from Washington, D.C., and I'll ask him, you know, like me, he's involved in the promotion of exports. Can you tell us about how your work in the Office of Finance and Insurance Industries, how it relates to fintech?
Thanks. First of all, thanks, Rod, and thanks, Patty, for having us here today. iValley Innovation Center is a great place for innovation across the East Bay and across the United States, so it's a pleasure to be here. One of the things that we're working on within our agency, which, as Rod said, there's about 2,000 of us. We're working across the U.S., working across the world to promote exports of small, medium, and large companies. And one of the things that we are having problems with, and we see a big use case for in fintech and blockchain, is trade finance. So what happened about last year? There's about $19.5 trillion in manufacturer exports worldwide. And about 80% of these exports required some sort of trade finance. So that's a lot of trade finance. And about 1.5 trillion in trade finance was left off the table because there was no providers for this trade finance. So these exports were lost across the U.S. And across the country. And so what we do in the National Trade Administration is we help companies. If you're an American company, we help you to enter these markets. And one of the ways we help is through making it easier for you to get access to trade finance. One of the things we've got going is a Trade Finance Advisory Council, which started a couple years ago and is made up of representatives from companies across various industries, manufacturing industries, services industries, financial services industries, other academia, research organizations, and they're getting together and trying to find out solutions to reduce this trade finance gap. And also specifically in 2018, 2019, looking to find fintech solutions for this gap. There's problems in correspondent banking. There's fewer banks that are willing to take on the trade finance risks. There's problems with anti-money laundering, know your customers. There's a lot of burdens for firms looking to provide this finance. Perhaps fintech can help. So last year, Secretary Ross asked the Trade Finance Advisory Council to specifically include blockchain as a possible solutions for trade finance. That's one area we're looking at.
I'm glad you mentioned blockchain. As I mentioned, I'm in the field in Oakland at the Oakland Federal Building, and I work closely with the Port of Oakland. And I'm really bullish on blockchain in terms of it being a solution for international commerce and facilitating trade. Being more transparent, getting rid of the paper associated with international transactions. So I'm glad you made mention of blockchain. Michael, let's talk about Hong Kong here. A lot going on in Hong Kong, so let's get that out of the way right away in terms of the 800-pound gorilla. Can you talk about that situation and the attractive sectors of investment and market entry in Hong Kong?
A bit of a loaded question. Hello, everyone. I cannot talk about the politics so much because my focus, like yours, is more on the economic development, investment promotion side of things. But what can I say is that as far as numbers go, the capital inflows to Hong Kong were not disrupted. As far as the governmental response to potential impact of the situation in Hong Kong right now goes, it's immediate in a sense that HKMA, which is the Hong Kong's de facto central bank, decrease the number of reserves that banks have to keep in Hong Kong, which will free $30 billion US into the economy to help those businesses that were impacted by the situation. As far as my numbers in terms of attracting companies to Hong Kong, and this is the main thing that I do at my work, they were not impacted yet. So we are hopeful. Hong Kong, in a way, is known for protests. Those actually made headlines, and they are stronger than the ones in the past. But at the same time, Hong Kong still remains a very attractive place for business. And the fact that, like my colleague in Singapore, we have offices close to you, close to your companies. We are based in San Francisco. That means that if you have any concerns, we're happy to address them and help you in your own time zone and close to you. Now, in terms of interesting sectors, and maybe in terms of why Hong Kong in general is interesting, we are particularly interesting for B2B fintechs. By fintechs, as it was mentioned in the previous panel, it's more of the vertical rather than horizontal. So not just plain fintechs, but also companies that provide services for financial services institutions. Specifically, the scale-ups, not so much startups. So companies that are post-seed round, that are looking to that are already validated in their own market and they're looking for growth. We have 158 banks. So if you're looking to sell your services to banks, there's no other location in Asia, specifically East Asia, where you will have that many customers. Same goes for the insurance companies. We also have 156 insurance companies. So this is a huge volume of customers you can potentially sell to. And insurance is actually the sector that we believe will attract more investments and more potential opportunities, purely because banks in the past couple of years were pretty fast, and by fast I mean Asia fast, in terms of adapting new technologies. Insurance companies have been a little bit more slower in that sense. And the final, insurance and service suppliers to insurance companies are the ones that right now and probably for the next year or two will have a pretty much a golden era in Hong Kong in terms of doing business. And one thing for those that are not very familiar with Hong Kong, and I think that speaks also for Singapore, when you're looking at Asia and doing business in Asia, the fact that I'm sitting here in front of you, and I think that's pretty much tied in with the previous panel, the fact that I'm sitting in front of you shows why Hong Kong is attractive for business. Not because I'm attractive, it's because I'm not a Hong Konger. I've never lived in Hong Kong, and I've been doing this job for 3 years, brought over $50 million of investments to Hong Kong. And again, not because I'm that clever, it's because Hong Kong is very international. It's because Hong Kong is very easy to do business in. And if you connect all the dots, you can be pretty successful in both of our pretty international locations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. Brandon, so let's talk Singapore again. What opportunities are available for U.S. fintechs in Singapore and the greater Asia-Pacific region, I guess you could call it?
Sure. I should have just prefaced this a bit earlier, but Southeast Asia is a collection of 10, 11 countries, including Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, some of the most populous countries in the region outside of China and India. So I would say if you're a fintech company looking to expand internationally, Singapore can do 3 things for you. We can help you experiment, we can help find you the right partner, and we can be a partner to your investment or setup for the region. For experiment, our central bank, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, again, a bit of a mouthful, has been extremely willing to relax certain regulations in a sandbox environment to help fintech companies play with new or novel products and solutions. As an example, MetLife, the insurance company, recently trialed a blockchain-based insurance product for gestational diabetes that allowed you to, from your mobile device, access your electronic medical records and get an insurance policy quote and pay for it within minutes. That's a kind of environment that the government is trying to encourage and kind of spirit of innovation that we think fintech should have. On the partnership front, I would give two examples. So the first is if you're looking to partner with an FI in the region on issues of financial inclusion, we recently participated in an initiative called the API Exchange. It's basically an international marketplace for fintechs to discover FIs who might want to work with them to tackle problems relating to financial inclusion in Southeast Asia. Again, there's a sandbox environment in there, and we create a library of APIs that you can use to plug into not just the partner you're working with, but that you can use to scale across the region as well. Maybe on the little bit more of the conventional partnership side, in Singapore, we have a few really interesting banks. The most prominent that you might have heard of is called DBS Bank. It's Asia's biggest bank. If you talk to their CEO, and he's going to be speaking at the Fintech Festival in Singapore in a month's time, he views DBS Bank is more of a tech company than a bank, and he's trying to reinvent the entire banking experience for consumers. So if you download their app, it's a pretty interesting experience. They're extremely eager and hungry to look for partners who can work with them on kind of short-circuiting the banking experience, whether it's online or the physical banking experience. So there are those kinds of opportunities available. And thirdly, invest. If you're convinced by the opportunities in Southeast Asia and/or Asia and want to set up a team to kind of tackle those problems, I would say, I'm a little bit biased, of course, but I would say Singapore is one of the best places to do it. Besides having a friendly pro-business environment, a strong intellectual IP protection regime, the government is extremely encouraging of foreign investments. We have a range of different agencies and support schemes available, whether you want to set up a regional headquarters, an engineering team, an R&D team, an innovation lab. I won't get into the weeds of that because there's a lot of different details there, but the short of it is if you're interested, I'm based in San Francisco and I'm happy to have a conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Brandon. Scott, I know you mentioned trade finance, and in my career with the Department of Commerce and previous to that, not with the U.S. Marine Corps, but with the U.S. Peace Corps, finance is one of the biggest issues in lesser developed countries in terms of inclusion in the greater economy. And so I just want to make mention of some other federal government agencies that are out there involved in export finance, which is the U.S. Export-Import Bank. So they facilitate export finance. And then the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which is another federal government agency that's going to be changing its name. It's going to be melded with the U.S. Agency for International Development as part of the BUILD Act that was just recently passed by this administration. And that is a project finance organization within the U.S. government. I can answer more questions about those should you be interested. But Scott, tell us, what else are you working on back in D.C. to help in the fintech realm? What are we doing?
Thanks, Rod. I was in the Peace Corps too, so I'm glad for your service there. And thanks for mentioning the Development Bank. I was wondering if I was going to introduce that today or not.
Go ahead.
No, I don't have to. So what I kind of failed to mention is, in addition to trade finance, we look to reduce barriers for all companies, particularly my office for financial services companies. We also look to increase your activities in new policy agreements. Now, one other thing we do is we look at promotion. So what we have going on this week, as we speak, there's a certified trade mission where we take fintech companies, in this case, we're taking them to the United Arab Emirates, and they have their own fintech show there, along with some other programs that are highlighting successful U.S. fintech companies. And that's part of Rod's group here, and we're proud to have them work with us. Another thing that's going on in a couple weeks is your Hong Kong FinTech Week. And that's also going to be represented by U.S. fintech companies. And then finally, the Singapore FinTech Festival at the beginning of November. Now, this is I don't think it's been mentioned here, but it's probably the largest fintech festival in the world, and it's where our Deputy Assistant Secretary delivered some remarks last year in a blockchain session. So those are things to look at. And if you want more information, you could talk to Rod, or you could talk to me about upcoming activities. Now, getting to the trade policy area, we have the new, not yet implemented, United States, Mexico, Canada trade agreement. So that has not yet been ratified in Congress, but it is an updated version of a previous agreement, and it includes more protection specifically for financial services firms, particularly for what might be important for you. If you have data, it allows you to move it across borders without having restrictions. If you have data in the U.S. that you want to keep in the U.S., you're not required to keep your data in a particular country. So these are important provisions that weren't in previous agreements. And so I think they're highly relevant for fintech exporters. And finally, we first started looking at the blockchain area when Bitcoin came out, and distributed ledger programs and ideas were floated around, and mostly they were related around Bitcoin. So we're following the space now, but most of our work in blockchain is related to enterprise blockchain, how it can make U.S. companies more effective, efficient, and secure.
Okay, so we won't even go there with the cryptocurrencies.
No, not today.
So Brandon, you've talked about why Hong Kong is attractive. Can you drill down into some success stories that you might have to share with the audience?
I wish I could talk about Hong Kong, but
Sorry,
Doris?
Michael, forgive me.
Our locations are very similar in terms of what we can offer. It's just different parts of Asia. But in terms of the success stories, I would say we have right now the eight unicorns that come out of Hong Kong. So that's a pretty significant numbers, given that when I started 3 years ago, we had 0.
Any examples?
Yes, and so one of my favorite ones is actually called Klook, and it's not connected to fintech. Klook helps you book tickets very quickly, book experiences. It's a really neat application that I always look forward to use when I go to Hong Kong. Within fintech space, we have a company called TNG and also a company called AirWallex, both of them. And WeLab, two first companies are connected with payments. WeLab is connected with lending and social scores. And so those are pretty strong and I think significant success stories. And I think what's also worth mentioning is the success stories when it comes to American companies that are operating in Hong Kong, because we often say that Hong Kong is a great place for business, but then who actually went there and achieved a rate of success? So specifically in the past 2 years, blockchain companies, not so much digital exchanges, digital currency exchanges, but blockchain companies that provide services to financial services institutions have been really successful in Hong Kong. We worked and successfully led them to launching in Hong Kong with a number of companies called, for example, R3, Corda, or Consensus. Consensus liked Invest Hong Kong services so much that they hired my boss. So it's been an interesting time for working for Invest Hong Kong in terms of finding those success stories and being able to base on that. Now we're hoping for more success stories when it comes to, as I mentioned before, companies that can cater to insurance companies that can cater to KYC, AML related issues.
Okay, all right, thanks. Sorry, now, Brandon. I have worked with my colleagues at the U.S. Embassy in Singapore on promoting the FinTech Festival there. Can you go into a little bit more detail about that trade event in Singapore?
sure. I mean, Scott's already given a great summary of it, but it's basically Asia's largest fintech event. Last year, we had over 45,000 people. This year, we might go a little bit bigger, fingers crossed. What we're doing this year actually is pretty interesting. In the past, we've always had participation from major banks, financial institutions, the IMF, and other governments around the world. This year, we're combining the FinTech Festival with something called Switch, Singapore Week of Innovation and Technology. I'm throwing a lot of acronyms at you, but it's essentially a conference on broader digital transformation for companies. So FinTech Festival will be a huge component of that, but we'll also be talking about a range of other technologies. So it's going to be an interesting event for not just networking, but our central bank likes to make some interesting announcements during the FinTech Festival that are super relevant to companies looking to partner or do business in Singapore and the region. So I would really encourage you, if you have the time and can spare like a 16-hour flight down to Singapore to try to make it. If you can't, I'm based here, so again, like happy to talk to anyone about either a FinTech Festival or other ways that you can plug into Singapore.
All right, thank you. As I look at the clock, we're winding down here on our session. So I was going to see if there are any questions out there in the audience in terms of the international FinTech arena. If anybody has an interest in international relating to FinTech. Yes, ma'am.
Women are into it. What are you all doing to encourage more women participation in international business opportunities?
So my senior commercial officer in Singapore is a woman, and that's who I worked with in promoting the Singapore festival. And I can at least speak to my federal government agency, in which there's quite a few women in the Foreign Service, our U.S. Commercial Service. And when it comes to the industry, now that, I don't know if I can venture an answer on that front. But I don't know. My colleagues here from Hong Kong, Singapore, any mention of inclusion?
I mean, Chief Executive of Hong Kong is female, but also when I go to Hong Kong, I'm always extremely impressed. My background is not in finance, my background is in journalism. But now when I get to meet representatives of the financial services industry in Hong Kong, I'm always shocked by the number of extremely fast-talking, fast-moving, fast achieving success women that are from Hong Kong. Shocked because really this is the rate that I'm not familiar with from the journalism industry. So in Hong Kong, I think women are very well represented.
I can tell you at the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, when they look at funding projects, some of the projects where they give kind of extra points as far as approving are for women-related organizations. They're funding women entrepreneurs, those kind of things. But within our building, it's probably at least half women. But when you look at the tech space, when most of the, a great majority of the people are men, so it's not too surprising for us that we're going to see more men there. But in our organization, it's kind of gender neutral. But we do have some programs that try to push the needle some. But
Well,
we need to go more.
Yeah, I think in federal government, just riffing off our prior panel there, when it comes to military veterans, returned Peace Corps volunteers, women, people of color, the U.S. government is really doing all that it can to attract people, at least within our ranks, into the organization.
Can I push one extra point?
Sure.
So we're coming out with in I don't know, 1 or 2 months, perhaps more. Things take longer in the government. It's called a request for information. It goes through the Federal Register. So it's basically we want your advice on how we can promote fintechs, blockchain through trade and trade agreements, trade policy, that kind of thing. And you guys are doing it. We want to hear from you. So we're going to let Rod, we're going to let Patty know when this is going to come out, and we'll let you guys know, and then you can have a chance to register your input and suggestions.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. It looks like we're at the end of our time.
You can have a couple more minutes. I was just coming up here.
The MC move up here.
I wasn't trying to slyly end
any
your
other
session.
questions out there in the audience before we close? Oh, we got one more.
Do you actually see any hopes for like standardizing the trade finance stuff? Because right now it comes across as free-form text. It's hard to parse. You don't have too much clarity on
Ooh, Scott, do you want to try and tackle that? That's a loaded one.
I'm not specific about trade finance. I know we're looking at the Department of Homeland Security, for example, when they're funding blockchain and they're looking at some of their programs for getting goods across the port. They're looking at standardizing and making things more operable across platforms. Trade finance, I think in the trade finance, the TFAC platform that I talked about at the beginning, I think they're looking at some of those things. But yeah, those are some hurdles to get by. And I know NIST, our colleagues in the National Institute of Standards and Technology within Commerce, they're also looking at making things a little more equal, operable across platforms and standards, but not so sure about for trade finance.
Yeah, my comments about blockchain earlier was more wishful thinking. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, blockchain is on their radar, and we are interested in getting better goods movement through our ports and airports. And since my agency is in the business of export promotion and trade promotion, anything, and it's almost a call to action to all of you in the field there in the audience, to contribute to this arena where we can expedite goods shipments through the use of different fintech technologies and make things move better.
They fund investors, they fund companies to do this work.
Okay. All right. I think we're at the end of our time. So I'll just say thank you to my panelists and thank you to the audience.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so we have one last keynote session and then one more startup launchpad left. So we're on the home stretch here. Look at all of you who have still stayed throughout the whole day. We can really see who's really committed here. Very excited to see that.